reality project encompasses is on the occupied, unceded, seized territory, the traditional lands of both the Nisqually and Squaxin Island people, who have been the responsible stewards of these lands and waterways since time immemorial. With gratitude to our Native partners, I want to acknowledge to them and to our members and visitors this evening that as we work in conservation and protection of what are now known as public lands, the narratives of these lands and regions have not always fully recognized the people who lived here before colonization and continue to live here today. So I make this acknowledgement to open a space of recognition, inclusion, and the deepest respect for our sovereign tribal partners and all Indigenous people in our community. So I appreciate this time now to do a quick introduction of our climate reality leadership team for Thurston County. And if I say your name, just raise your hand. So there's myself, Marianne Tompkins, Wayne Olson, and Connie Campbell, Jason Selwitz, and Brock Gale, who's our chapter chair. So we're really excited to host tonight's program, and it is a great honor to welcome our guest speakers, the Nisqually Tribal Chairman, Willie Frank III, and Natural Resources Director for the Nisqually Tribe, David Troutt. Steve Robinson is our moderator tonight, and as well as being a climate reality member with Thurston County, Steve has an impressive and extensive resume. It includes being a University of Oregon journalism graduate, a former newspaper reporter, and public relations manager with 50 years of communications experience, mostly with the tribes. So at this time, I'm going to ask you to please mute your speakers, and I am going to turn this program over to Steve. Steve, you have to unmute. You have to unmute, Steve.
Is that better? Here I am. Thank you for inviting me to be with you tonight. Climate change and the tribes, the impacts, the responses. We have two outstanding speakers tonight, both very long-time friends of mine and both strong leaders. As they make their presentations, I'm asking that you hold your questions until the end of their presentations. Willie Frank III is the chairman of the Nisqually Tribe. He's in his third term on council. He's a graduate of the Evergreen State College Native Studies program and a strong advocate of treaty rights, fish and wildlife habitat, and the environment. I've known him his entire life, kind of call him my spiritual nephew. And he's the son of Billy Frank Jr. and Sue Crystal, both of whom were very strong leaders in this area as well as nationwide. Billy was the longtime chairman, 30 years as of the chairman of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, and has been honored in many, many different ways, and very rightfully so. Sue Crystal was a very strong leader, and particularly in the health area, and particularly under the Locke and Lauer administrations. Willie is a strong leader in his own right, and I'm very happy to be able to welcome him to go ahead and make his comments for us tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good to go? Man, I for sure thought by now we'd be in person, but hey, you know, at least we're getting to see everybody tonight. My name is Willie Frank III. My Indian name is Kalashkit, and that was given to me by my grandfather, Willie Frank Sr., who lived to be 104. I am the chairman of the Nisqually Indian Tribe. I just got elected in May, 2021. I've been on tribal council since 2009, and I'm pretty excited about the direction the tribe is going in right now. I'm glad to have David Troutt on here with me tonight as well. We just actually spent the whole day together with the Tribal Council Natural Resources Retreat, so it worked out perfect that we're finishing the evening with you guys tonight. I am a fisherman on the Nisqually River. I fish in the same area at Frank's Landing where my father and grandfather fished, and my brother and I still fish in that spot. So we, everything that you guys are doing, everything the Nisqually Tribe does, it's all in partnership, collaboration. We were just had a really good presentation on the Nisqually Land Trust and some of the partnerships we're having with the tribe and the Land Trust. It's really, opened my eyes up the last few years. I think maybe COVID, I've had a chance to read more, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it just the bell went off in my head. I don't know. But realizing, looking at the big picture, how it's going to take all of us really coming to the table and working together. And I know I've talked to Tom many times, and I'm really glad to be here tonight, Tom. I know we've talked a lot over the years. Sometimes it just takes for everything to line up right, I guess. So I think Steve, are we going to turn it over to David? Or are you going to do a intro for David? How do you want to do this? Because David and I can go all night. So, I mean, we do this quite a bit. So
I'm happy to do that, Willie. Is Dave on the line?
Yep, he's here.
I'm here.
All right, outstanding. Well, David Troutt, also a longtime friend of mine and a very strong leader. He's a Husky graduate of the University of Washington. As a Duck, I won't hold that against him, but but he's been the natural resource director for the Nisqually Tribe since 1987. And he has been commissioner of Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. He's chair of the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council. It has been since 2012. He also serves on the Puget Sound Partnership Ecosystem Coordinating Board. He's president of the Nisqually River Council and the Nisqually River Foundation. He's a passionate advocate for salmon recovery and Puget Sound restoration. David, the show is yours.
Thank you, my friend. And it's been too long since we've had a chance to see each other. So good to see you, Steve.
Thank you.
And good to see many friendly faces out there. Commissioner Messner, it's been a while. Good to see you. I see lots of members of my Nisqually River Council out there. Great to see you. Roderick Harris, how the heck are you doing, my friend? It's been a long time. So I feel like this is like a family reunion. So I'm really happy to be here and spend some time with you talking about climate change and what we're doing. And I got to tell you, Willie and I did spend all day together, and props to his outfit. Look at Willie. He's looking pretty good tonight.
Well, David, I asked David, I said, what do I need to wear tonight? Who's going to be on here? And then, of course, he said Ty was going to be on here. So I was like, well, I got to at least wear a nice shirt anyway, I guess. I had a sweatshirt on. I was kind of ready to just relax a little bit. But, David talked me into putting a nice shirt on. So.
Impressive. And so I love these evening meetings because during the day you're working, you have to drink coffee, tea, or water. But tonight, a little red wine helps the presentation go a little more smoothly. So hopefully you are enjoying that as well. So talk to you about some of the work that we're doing in the Nisqually watershed around climate change. And some of you have probably seen my presentations in the past, the Nisqually River Council and other groups around the I-5 project. And that really is a big project focused on dealing with climate change. We had some really good coverage in the Daily Olympian and the TNT in the past month that really did a great job of capturing a lot of the details. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then I'm going to go to the other end of the watershed and talk about the work we're doing in the upper watershed relative to climate change as well. So for all of you who don't know me, my name is David Troutt, Natural Resources Director for the Nisqually Indian Tribe. I've been working on salmon recovery issues for a long time and really proud of the work that we've done in the Nisqually watershed. And many of you who drive up and down the I-5 corridor, crossing the Nisqually River at high tide, you can see Puget Sound lapping up against I-5. And that's only a recent occurrence. That's a result of a lot of partners, a lot of you and the tribe and others working to restore the Nisqually estuary. And bit by piece, step by step, with tribal leadership and our partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it's the largest estuary restoration project north of San Francisco Bay. The Skokomish folks have done a lot of really good work, but we're just like an acre or maybe an acre and a half larger than they are. And so we maintain the lead in restoring habitat for salmon. And it really is a remarkable story. We, through a relationship that we've had for 100 years with the Braggett family, were able to acquire the Braggett Farm on the Pierce County side of the Nisqually Delta with the express purpose of restoring the habitat there. And we provided Ken and his mother a life estate on the farm while we continued to do our estuary restoration work. And Ken was always proud to say that he went from raising cows to raising salmon and did a fabulous job of that. And we set the example by slowly doing 5 acres and then 15 acres and then eventually 50 and then finally another 120 on our property to show that it was possible and to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service to convince them to do the right thing as well. We had great leadership there in place with Jean Takakawa, who was the previous director there at the refuge, and her background included work in San Francisco Bay restoration. So it was a natural for her to embrace the idea of restoring and returning the habitat back to its natural condition. So in 2008, we breached the dikes at the Nisqually Wildlife Refuge, and for the first move back into the Nisqually estuary on those properties. And it was a remarkable sight to see. I was there when the first tide came in, and there are a lot of memories that rush through me as I think about it. One is that as the saltwater moved in, there were a lot of field mice in the fields that weren't expecting to be wet. And so they started moving around rather quickly, and the great blue herons and the rookeries around McAllister noticed it very quickly, and suddenly we had 50 great blue herons flying all around us, picking off these field mice. It was a little scary at first, but then as you look a little closer to the water, you could actually see the first salmon riding the waves into the estuary. That old saying, the old movie, that if you build it, they will come. If you restore an estuary, the fish will show up. And it was remarkable to see within hours, we had Chinook salmon moving into that created habitat. And the success story has been remarkable. It's a fabulous restoration of habitat. Our Chinook are responding. The survival there is tremendous. It's supporting our Chinook salmon and chum salmon and steelhead. And it's not only Nisqually fish that benefit, but 25% of the fish that we sampled there during our monitoring are from other watersheds. So we see fish from the Puyallup, we see fish from the Snohomish and the Green. White River Spring Chinook absolutely love the Nisqually Delta. They come down and rear for a long way. So it was not only a project important to us, it was a project of regional significance. It had a major impact on salmon throughout southern Puget Sound and has been a remarkable success and continues to be. But its ultimate success is really being threatened now by climate change. As we've been monitoring the use of the habitat over the last 12 or 14 years, we've noticed that sea level rise is a real thing. And it's happening in the Nisqually Delta, and it's happening quickly. And we're noticing that the habitats that we've created are getting deeper than we intended them to be. And that's really for 2 reasons. One is certainly sea level rise has impacted that, and so the waters are moving further upstream. But also the projects that the Tacoma Power operates on the Nisqually, the 2 hydro projects, are effectively blocking about 90% of the sediment coming off of Mount Rainier. And so the Nisqually River, which is kind of odd to say for a river, is sediment starved. And so we're only getting about 10% of the available sediment down to the Nisqually Delta. And of that 10%, because of the configuration of I-5, 80% of it gets pushed offshore and gets lost into Puget Sound. And only 20% circulates back into the Delta to rebuild those areas that over 100 years from agricultural use have allowed the land to subside. And so our plan and our goal was to have, within 25 years, these turn into really productive salt marshes with eelgrass beds, potentially bull kelp on the outside areas. But because of the sediment issue and sea level rise, these areas are deeper and they're more mudflat kind of habitats than they are salt marsh habitats. Now, mudflats are still productive. They're certainly more productive than being behind dikes and not available at all, but they're limited in terms of their ability to support fish. We recently had a PhD student from Oregon complete her PhD, where she calculated the number of calories. She likes to say she calculated the number of cheeseburgers that are produced in the Nisqually Delta and how many fish would be available to eat those cheeseburgers or the calories. And so in essence, developed a carrying capacity for the Nisqually Delta based on calories. And that's really based on habitat, which is based on depth and salinity. And so as the estuary gets deeper because of sea level rise, it produces less calories, meaning it could hold less fish. And so we're currently, based on our estimations, at capacity in the Nisqually Delta. In the face of all the wonderful restoration work we've done, it's already being fully utilized. There's not a lot of free space or time available for more fish. And that's a problem for us because in the Nisqually, our natural Chinook are at a very low level that we need to restore under the Endangered Species Act, and it's limiting the tribe's ability to fish. We have two components of Chinook in the Nisqually. We have a natural wild run, and we have a hatchery run. The hatchery run is typically around 20,000 fish, and the wild run is typically around 1,000 fish. And it's the 1,000 fish that controls the ability for our tribe to fish. And so, as an example of how limiting this is, when I started in 1987, when I was 5 years old for the Nisqually Indian tribe, Billy's dad recruited me out of middle school.
I really was 5 years old in 1987, though, Dave.
We were fishing 105 days through the year, from July through February, catching all the various runs of salmon in a sustainable way. And that had been going on for generations prior to me arriving. In 2015, we fished 8 total days in the Nisqually River. And Willie can tell you what that means to the Nisqually people, to lose that connection, to lose access, to lose the ability to catch fish. And maybe, Willie, you want to share a story or two about what that means?
Yeah, just thinking about that, the river was pretty high this last week with all the rain that came, and it was pretty beautiful down there. I was walking down behind the Wahilud Indian School at Frank's Landing, and just looking at the I-5 bridge, and of course just the change of the river and the bank and the erosion. Then the trees are starting to fall in the river right there, and the pilings right there. It just shows you how strong the river really is. When you look at that river moving fast. And I was always taught to don't ever be scared of the river, but you respect the river. And actually this last year, David and I and tribal council and others, we started giving these boat tours to folks who really to try to show them the big picture of this whole project. And I was actually going, I think it was about March of last year, and I was getting ready to take Pierce County executor down for a ride and show him the bridge. And I fished on this river 20 years of my life. I've driven up and down at night, and I know where most of the snags are. And I was going down, I got the boat by myself kind of to warm it up, and I hit a log, and I almost flipped my boat, and it was the scariest thing ever. And so it made me understand that big picture, though, of respecting the river and slowing down. And now, especially as the chairman, I'm going 100 miles an hour. But whenever I need to get myself centered and grounded, the river's always there. And it took me a few months to get back on, but once I got back on, it was like I never left. And it's just that something about that river, and that wasn't even during fishing season, and so imagine, the love that we and the passion that I have, and I always compare it to, having the 12, 13 days we're able to fish. It's better than nothing, and my father always said, you set that net when the river's open, whether there's fish in there or not, because, they'll take it away if you're not exercising your treaty right. And my father at 82, he was still fishing. I know a lot of you guys hear this story all the time, but my 82 years old, he was still going, he was going about 95 miles an hour then. But, he'd get on the river with my brother, Sugar, and I, and we'd be fishing, and a fish would hit the net, and he'd almost jump in after it. And, so for me, it showed that passion and that, the love and the commitment he had to the river, though, and to our salmon and to our resources. But to our partnerships and to our collaborations with everybody here in the state, at the federal, state level, and the local level, and having that opportunity to get folks on the river and really advocate for this I-5 bridge project, I think that could be huge. you know, and Ty, I'd love to take you down there sometime. Well, let's do it when it gets a little warmer though, definitely. You know, not in the winter time, especially right now, but you know, I think anything we can do to continue the collaboration. I know we have a lot of projects that we're, you know, ramping up for in the spring with our youth and trying to get more of our youth, Nisqually youth in our community engaged in natural resources and climate change. Really just understanding it. And I think David today, you know, we spent the whole day together, and it was the first time I think we've ever in the history of Nisqually have had a retreat like that, to where, you know, kind of the walls came down and the barriers that were up between certain areas that affected us, you know, and it makes me understand that if people are willing to, you know, come to the table and, you know, sit and listen and make tough decisions, have tough conversations, we can get a lot accomplished, you know, and, you know, this I-5 project is going to be huge, but for us, it's more about our treaty, and not so much of our treaty, but just our way of life. You know, we, of course, you hear David and I talk about Mount Rainier and, you know, partnerships along the river, but, you know, the 80 miles of Mount Rainier, I know I always get glares from other Indian tribal leaders throughout the U.S. when I talk about how amazing our Nisqually River is. And I know other tribes here in the state always, you know, they don't like hearing about the Nisqually River sometimes, you know, as far as all the great work we've done, because really it is a model, but that couldn't be done without everybody on this call right now and the support. Yeah, so, you know, thank you guys all, of course.
Yep, right on, Willie. And so it's really important that we restore salmon, and we really fully restore the estuary so that Willie and tribal members have more time on the Nisqually River and can be out there catching the fish that they've been catching for generations. And so the configuration of I-5 across the Nisqually Delta, if you've looked at it at all as you drive across it, it's basically the third dam on the Nisqually River. We've got the Tacoma dams. There's two of those, but the fourth dam. There's a dam that the city of Centralia operates at River Mile 26. It's a diversion dam that diverts 800 CFS down into some turbines. What's really interesting about the Centralia project and the Tacoma project is they're both built in the 1920s and 1930s to generate electricity for Tacoma and Centralia. Electricity wasn't delivered onto the Nisqually Reservation until 1969. So they were manipulating the Nisqually River for the benefit of others at the cost of the Nisqually Indian tribe and its resources and its people. And there's a lot to be told there, but that's another night and another night story. But I-5 does, in essence, act as a dam across the Nisqually estuary. It blocks floodwaters from moving downstream effectively when we've had high waters. And for those of you that were here in '96 and remember the really big flood we had, it flooded over 15,000 private acres above I-5, and it stayed that way for almost 3 weeks because there was no effective way of moving floodwaters downstream through the dam, except through the Nisqually River itself. And it wasn't very effectively designed to handle that. So it created a lot of hardship for private landowners, some of you that are probably on this call, and including tribal members whose properties were flooded. I remember our friend Porgy Couts, she has a 2-story house, and she was up in her 2nd story trying to move her records and her pictures out of the floodwaters because the waters had covered her entire basement, her entire 1st floor. And so 13 or 14 feet of floodwaters on her property. And it was like that for 2 weeks. And so I-5 forms a dam affecting upstream properties, but it's also forming a dam from the habitat on the downstream side. So what would typically happen in a natural situation with sea level rise is that critical habitats would simply form upstream. The salt water would move further upstream and those habitats would reestablish. But I-5 blocks that. And so it's getting deeper in the Nisqually Delta. And one of the key areas that we monitor for fish use is about a 8-acre spot. That's this perfect place where the fresh waters meet the salt waters. And it creates this 20-foot depth gradient of salinity from freshwater on the top to Puget Sound on the bottom, and it gradually changes. And our Chinook salmon spend 80% of our Chinook salmon spend a month in this one particular habitat, slowly adapting from becoming a freshwater animal to a saltwater animal. So in that time, in that space, they can choose what salinity they want to be in, so they can gradually adapt so they can survive as they move out into Puget Sound. And what we're noticing is that that salinity gradient is changing. Instead of having this real gradual band of water, it's now becoming more like Puget Sound. And so that habitat is changing dramatically, and it's affecting our fish's ability to survive. And the only way to recreate that habitat is to really reconfigure the crossing of I-5 across the Nisqually Delta. Now, Willie and his dad, Billy, and I have been talking about this for probably 20 years. And I remember having and Steve remembers these meetings with Billy, where Billy would flip over a placemat at Hawks Prairie when Hawks Prairie used to, they had these paper placemats. He would flip it over and he would draw things. And he drew all kinds of things. If you've ever heard of the Timber, Fish, and Wildlife Agreement, and Steve Robinson certainly knows what I'm talking about,
Yes.
Billy created that on the back of a Hawks Prairie placemat. And so on this particular meeting, Billy drew his vision of solving the problem. And it was this elevated bridge from JBLM to Hawks Prairie, this wonderful engineered, crazy design, 300 feet off the ground, and with toll booths, because Billy loved the sound. I remember being in New Jersey with Billy on a particular trip. He loved the sound of the quarters going through the toll booth. So he wanted a toll booth on the Nisqually Bridge to pay for salmon restoration in Nisqually. And that's one of the visions that's out there. And that's something that we're going to be looking at. But looking at real world dollars, that's probably $30 billion. Now, it's not my money, although some of it's my money, but some of it's your money. It's, potentially federal and state funds, but $30 billion is a lot of money. So we're looking at options that maybe are a little less costly to solve the problem. And they really involve replacing the bridges at Nisqually to something bigger with a bigger span, and maybe creating, instead of a dam across the Nisqually from McAllister up to the wetlands in Pierce County, but putting it on piers, elevated on piers, so that the floodwaters can naturally move downstream and the habitat can move upstream and reestablish itself. Now, that's going to require some restoration work and some acquisition of right-of-ways. All of this is going forward. We've been talking about it for a long time, but it's starting to gain traction. And those Olympian and TNT articles were fantastic in getting the word out and getting folks educated about what we're working on. So for the last 3 legislative sessions, we've been successful in getting little pieces of money added to the pie to do various work. And one of the things we've done is a pretty incredible study through the USGS to create a model to predict what would happen if we change I-5. Well, first to predict what happens if we don't change I-5 and what that looks like. And what that looks like is 2 things. One is overtopping of I-5 on a regular basis, probably every 15 to 20 years. And so if you remember 96 with the Chehalis getting flooded, in fact, if you remember 3 days ago with I-5 overtopping at the Chehalis, that would be happening in the Nisqually Delta every 10 or 15 years based on climate change predictions. The other thing is that, and what Willie was talking about, is across from Frank's Landing at the Wahilud Indian School, the Nisqually River is flowing upstream. It's created this massively huge bend in the river because I-5 is blocking the release of its energy. So it's fighting against that, and it's trying to find a way to get downstream. And it's actually flowing upstream while really eroding the downstream end and the Frank's Landing end. And so it's creating lots of damage to try to find an equilibrium. What's likely to happen, and it could happen this winter, which really terrifies me, if we get a 96-like flood, is that the Nisqually River will jump channel and it will go through those wetlands on the Pierce County side, and it will take out the northbound and southbound lanes of I-5. And for those of you who can remember just a few years ago when we had the train wreck at DuPont and the crazy mess that created for traffic and moving goods and people and the local economies in South Sound, if the Nisqually River takes out I-5, it's going to create a disaster for us in South Sound. And it will also create a potential national security risk. 30% of the workforce at JBLM lives in Thurston County. They cross the Nisqually River twice every day. Their main communication lines runs underneath the Nisqually River Bridge. And so if I-5 takes out, if Nisqually takes out I-5 and the bridges are impacted as well, at the same time, we've got I don't know, missile testing going on in North Korea that happened today, their most expansive missile testing they've done ever. If that creates a national emergency while we've got a river flood in winter, we could really be in trouble as a nation. And so JBLM has made this one of their highest priorities for the legislature and for the folks in DC to pay attention to. And we've developed partnerships, not only with JBLM, but with Lakewood and Stillicum and DuPont and Pierce County and Thurston County and Lacey and Olympia, all with the mission of taking this on as a big project. And so we currently have $5 million going through the Department of Transportation to do the first step in the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy work, the EIS work. So we're looking at preferred alternatives. We're doing some cost assessments. I'm hoping to have all this done by November of next year, so that in the next legislative session for the next biennial budget, we'll go in for a construction request to start moving this project into actual construction. And it's probably going to be somewhere in the 2 to 5 billion range, depending on a lot of things that are way out of our control. I mean, the cost of building stuff now is skyrocketing. And so we're not really sure what this project's going to cost, but probably around $5 billion, adding lanes, replacing 2 bridges on the Nisqually. We'd also have to replace 4 Burlington Northern bridges on the Pierce County side that are constricting our ability to add lanes for traffic purposes. And so at the end of the day, it's probably a $5 billion project, and it's probably 10 years before it's complete. But there has to be urgency, because the Nisqually River is not going to wait. And if we spend 20 or 30 years hemming and hawing and worrying about how much it costs and not getting to it, the Nisqually River will take care of it. And my biggest fear, and I think Willie shares it, is that if it were to happen next week, the Corps of Engineers would come in and do a Corps of Engineers fix. They would rip wrap the Nisqually River around Frank's Landing. They would channelize it back underneath the bridge, and we would be stuck with the environmental outcomes for 50 years. And the Nisqually Tribe's treaty rights would erode, and their time on the river would erode. And so we've got to get ahead of this. This is a really urgent project, and it really is all about creating resiliency in the Nisqually Delta to deal with climate change that we know is coming. And I could go on and on about this, but one of the things I find interesting, and Steve would remember these conversations, is that tribal elders have been talking about climate change for 50 years. They've seen it in their lifetimes. Billy talked about it. Terry Williams, dear friend from Tulalip, was one of the leading advocates around climate change issues before climate change was even in our vocabulary. And so sometimes it takes time to catch up with this, but we don't have a lot of time in this one. We've got to catch up quick. And so it's gaining momentum, it's gaining support. There was a bizarre, I don't know if you all saw it, but a bizarre letter to the editor in the Daily Olympian this week by some guy saying, yeah, that's too much money, let's not do that. Let's dike and fill, let's dredge the Nisqually, let's rip wrap the heck out of it so it doesn't go out of its channel, and then we'll be done with it. We don't need to worry about it. That's not the future that I think any of us want to see in the Nisqually Delta. So as this moves through the process, at some point, it's going to require a lot of voices, and not just mine and not just Willie's, but all of your voices to advocate for something like this, because difficult choices are going to have to be made. We're competing against things like fixing the I-5 crossing of the Columbia River, which is a problem. I totally get it, but that's a traffic problem. This is an environmental, treaty right, national security problem, and should demand more attention. But it's going to take a lot of folks like you all talking to your elected officials and moving them in the right direction. And I've got to say that we've had tremendous support from our local elected officials on both sides of the aisle. Andrew Barkus has been our champion on this one. He was able to get $5 million in the budget last year for our work, and it was an absolute miracle that he was able to do that given last year's budget situation with transportation stuff. And so this crosses the aisle. We've got support from Democrats and Republicans. We've got support from the realtors and the business develop interest in South Sound, and from citizens and NGOs and the Nisqually Tribe. And this is really a community saying, we need to fix this. And so that's the Nisqually Delta side of the things. Now we're also, let me have a sip of wine here before I go to the upper watershed.
Hold on real quick, Dave.
You go.
Hey, I noticed that our newly elected port commissioner on here, Bob Aiel, is on here.
Hey, Bob.
And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Bob was also he got voted the CEO of the, where was it? The county, Bob? I know he probably didn't want to say anything tonight, but I saw him on there. So I definitely want to acknowledge him. He's been doing a great job.
You caught me off guard, Willie.
I know,
but
Bob. I know. I was going to text you, but you know what? You're a port commissioner now. You got to be ready on the fly.
Yeah, I got to be ready. So,
especially with me, Bob.
Yeah, it's great to be here, you guys. This is a great message. I'm happy to hear it. And I'm happy to see how many people are on here. This is outstanding.
And so I've known Bob for a long time, and we've talked about a lot of things over the years, but Bob, we have not talked about this in your new capacity. So I need to set up a meeting and come see my favorite Olympia Port Commissioner.
Yeah, that's right. David, we'll have to set that up real soon.
Right on. And so if we now look to the upper watershed and climate change that's impacting the upper watershed, as you all know, the Nisqually River is tributary poor. We only have a handful of really key significant tributaries in the Nisqually. We've got Muck Creek that flows through JBLM and Pierce County and towns like Roy and Frederickson. We have Ohop Creek, which flows through the agricultural valley in the Ohop Valley. And another shout out to Ed Kinney. Ed's out there and one of our dear friends. We've got some smaller tributaries in the upper Nisqually, of which Ed found some coho spawning in one of the smaller tributaries. Notified me. We got our staff to meet with Ed this afternoon, I think, Ed, and we all went up there and saw and documented coho spawning in that tributary. So thank you for that, Ed. He's not going to jump on the line, but that's okay. Ed's a longtime friend and a supporter of all the things we do in the Nisqually. But as you move upstream from the Ohop, our biggest, most important tributary is the Michelle River. Flows through Edenville, flows through private and state timberlands, supports 2 ESA listed species in the Nisqually, steelhead and our Chinook salmon, and is absolutely vital for our recovery efforts. The Nisqually main stem is really the body of the Nisqually, and most of our work is done there, and most of the eggs are in that basket. So the salmon tend to spawn in the main stem. But if there's a disaster in the main stem, a flood or a drought that affects survival, we need to have functioning tributaries to support these fish to reestablish in the main stem in case things happen. So the Michelle is critically important for us. And what we've noticed just in the time that I've been at Nisqually, which is now 35 years, which really, you know, in climate terms is not that long. 35 years isn't that long. We've noticed that the Michelle River ecosystem has shifted dramatically, where when I started, it was a snow-based system. And so the upper Michelle watershed and the timberlands would be covered with snow that would provide water through the summer as it slowly melted over time. What we've noticed in the last 10 years is that snow no longer falls in the Michelle watershed, that it is now a rain-dominated system, which means we've got summer stream flow issues because we don't have that reservoir of snow anymore. And so that's creating a tremendous problem and an opportunity for us to work on climate change issues. Now, the other confounding issue in the Michelle is that it is timberland based. So there's a lot of commercial timber harvest in the watershed. And the current rules are the current rules. They're not perfect. I wish they were different, but they are what they are and we operate underneath them. What the rules don't account for, though, is the age of the trees. And what we've noticed through science, and EPA leading the way on this, we've developed a model called VELMA, where you can use to predict the amount of water in a stream based on the age of the trees. And what we've noticed with conifers in particular, young conifers younger than 40 years old are like straws. They basically suck water out of the ground, evapotranspirate it into the air, and affect stream flow. But about the time the trees get to be 60 to 80 years old, they do the opposite. They start to retain water, and the duff layers, Terry Williams duff layers, the duff layers underneath the forest retain water. And so the modeling work that we've done in the Michelle says if we can shift from a 40-year rotation to a 60-year rotation, we can double the stream flow in the summer in the Michelle to the benefit of salmon and steelhead. Right now in August, when our Chinook return, the Michelle does not flow to the Nisqually River. It goes dry. So our Chinook have to wait and sometimes a long time before the first rain comes before they can move upstream. And we measure water in terms of cubic feet per second, CFS. So in the summer right now, we're seeing about 5 cubic feet per second in the Michelle as a result of climate change and timber harvest, and it doesn't connect to the Nisqually River. If we manage the timberlands differently, we could increase the flow from 5 CFS to 12 CFS in the Michelle, and it would be connected year round, like it used to be 50 and 70 years ago. So it's a really big deal. So the question is, well, how do you get to older stand rotations in commercial timberlands? And there's 2 paths. One is the regulatory path. You could try to make them do it, which I see some smiles out there. That's not an easy thing to do. And the timber industry is big and powerful, and getting them to leave any trees is a miracle. But if we were to ask them to grow their trees older, we won't get anywhere. And so the option that we've decided to implement is to buy back the timberlands from the commercial timberland owners and put them into something we call a community forest. And so a forest that's owned by the Nisqually watershed community. Another interesting thing about our forest lands is that when I started in 1987, they were all owned by Weyerhaeuser. They were the biggest landowner in Western Washington. They were certainly the biggest landowner in the Nisqually watershed. Weyerhaeuser now owns no land in the Nisqually watershed. They've divested all of their timberland holdings in the Nisqually, and it hasn't gone to big corporations like Weyerhaeuser. It's gone to investment trusts. There was this new tax creation in the Congress about 20 years ago that allowed small investment groups to hold timberlands for their investment supporters under a couple of conditions. One is it had to make money, and 2 is that they had to sell it every 10 to 15 years. And so there is tremendous pressure on making money on our timberlands. It's way different from what Weyerhaeuser used to do. It's much more aggressive. And they're selling their lands every 10 or 15 years. And so it's hard to develop relationships with folks that are selling every 10 to 15 years. We knew the Weyerhaeuser company. We knew the Weyerhaeuser president. Billy and I would get in our car and drive up to that fabulous headquarters in Tacoma and go meet with the president of Weyerhaeuser if we had an issue. There isn't that kind of thing now for the timberlands in the Nisqually. They're managed by a management group, and the money flows out of the Nisqually, out of the local communities to the investors. In 2015, this is kind of a little factoid, in 2015, the biggest beneficiary of timber harvest in the Nisqually was the Plumbers Union from Paris, France. They owned the biggest investment shares in this particular, so the money was leaving. It wasn't even staying in the country. It was going to France, for God's sake. Now, I like French wine, but that's a little crazy. And so one of the benefits of buying the timberlands back from these investment trusts is to keep the money in the watershed, to support local jobs and local families, harvest it for multiple ecosystem benefits, increase the age rotations, provide public access, and to keep the money that's generated here to manage the lands. And so we've started down the path of creating the Nisqually Community Forest in partnership with the Nisqually Land Trust and the Nisqually Tribe. The Nisqually Indian Tribe just recently, about 2 months ago, closed on our first acquisition of commercial timberlands up there. It was 1,200 acres in the Upper Michelle Basin. At the same time, the Nisqually Land Trust closed on about a similar amount, a little bit more. And when we combine that with what we purchased in the past, we now have 5,000 acres as part of our Nisqually Community Forest. And it's fairly new. We're just going into the development of the management plans. We don't have public access yet, but we will soon have public access and the ability for all of us to enjoy those timberlands. And we're already managing them in a very different way. Our goal is to acquire all of the timberlands in the Michelle Basin. There's 50,000 acres, and we're now at 5,000, so we're 10% of the way there. It's all a start and all a march down that path, and it's all to provide resiliency to the Nisqually watershed, to provide resiliency to our salmon populations, so that the Nisqually tribe can continue to fish and others can continue to fish as well. And you know, when we talk about these big things like I-5 and $5 billion and buying 50,000 acres of commercial timberlands, sometimes when we talk about these things, people kind of laugh and say, there's no way you could possibly do any of these things. Well, I remember with Billy talking about protecting the Nisqually River, and we needed to protect it. And this is back in the 1989, 1990. And at the time, only 3% of the main stem Nisqually was in permanent protection, permanent stewardship. So from the mouth of the river up to the Tacoma Alder LeGrand dams, 42 miles, only 3% of that was in permanent stewardship. And that was on the Nisqually Indian Reservation and the Wildlife Refuge, and that was it. And Billy and I and others said, you know, our goal is we want to protect 90% of the Nisqually watershed, and we're going to start. And we got laughed out of rooms when we said we're going to protect 90% of the watershed. Well, it's now 2022. Anybody want to guess where we are? We're at 81%. 81% of the Nisqually watershed is in permanent stewardship. Big ideas, big plans. You have to start somewhere. You start with conversations. You start with neighbors and partners and supporters all rallying behind. We are going to put I-5 back on piers. We are going to have a community forest in the Nisqually. We're going to have salmon and steelhead for future generations, so you all and Willie's kids and all can enjoy it. And we're going to do it all together. There's no doubt in my mind we're going to be successful together. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would turn it back over to you, Willie, if you want to say a few.
I don't even need to say anything, Dave.
Well, gentlemen, you did an extraordinary job. Lots of information. There were times when I had a broad smile on my face, and there were times when steam was coming out of my ears. But I think that it is time now for us to do some Q&A. And so we have 65 people on board here.
I see that.
So instead of raising your hands, just go ahead and pipe up with whatever questions you might have for these two wonderful guys.
And real quick, we'll put our emails in the chat. So if there's any questions, I know there's a lot of folks on here. We want to make sure that we're able to hear from everybody. So I'll put mine in right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so go ahead and pipe up with any questions you have. If you could, please identify yourself as you do so.
Hi, Dave and Chairman Frank. I had a question about, and my name is Rick Burkholtz. I'm actually a son of Karen Burkholtz, who you might know Dave from the partnership. But I was wondering about the Nisqually. Is it, would you say that it's considered an endangered waterway right now as a result of these dams, as well as the third dam, the I-5 corridor?
That's an interesting question. And my tribal council today in our retreat asked a very similar question. And my response is that for a lot of the reasons that we talked about already, the Nisqually watershed is in better shape than it's been in over 100 years. When you think about the diking of the estuary in the early 1900s and the timber harvests that were occurring unregulated until the mid 1980s in the Nisqually watershed, we had 2 hydro projects operating without fish screens and without fish ladders and regulating the flows in a way that we had multiple tribal members drowned being in the Nisqually River. The Nisqually River and its habitat is in better shape than it's been in over 100 years. Now, we still have more work to do. It's not perfect, but we're in a really good place, and we're leaving a legacy for future generations to build upon. So, I've been working on this stuff for 35 years. I'd like to think I will be here when I-5 is finally put on piers, but I may not be, and that's okay. I may not be here when the final acre is purchased for the community forest, but it will be purchased by someone, and it'll happen. So it's in good shape, and it's only getting better.
Hey, real quick, I did see that our other commissioner was on here tonight, our good friends of the Nisqually Tribe, and she's been out a few different times. And I just wanted to acknowledge our other commissioner tonight who is on here. I don't know if she wants to say a few words.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I am. I'm very happy to be here. This was an amazing presentation, and I'm just excited about what can be done with partnerships. And again, thank you so much for your leadership, and I look forward to that boat ride.
Definitely. And I think we got Hanford making a hat for you, hopefully. You know, I'm sure if you ask him, he definitely will do it. Then he's gonna have to make one for Ty too, and then everybody else. Yeah, this could get, you know, better do it now before. But no, that question was really good, Rick. You know, I was thinking about it. We are very fortunate on the Nisqually for really for the work that David has done and many other folks. That commitment, the partnership, because when you see other watersheds, you see other rivers. When I was speaking earlier just about the you know, we always like to use Nisqually as an example, and I know that people, you know, always tease us at tribal meetings, you know, they're tired of hearing about Nisqually, but you know, it really is the work that we've done with the partnerships, but also, you know, just the mismanagement of the resources in other areas throughout the state, you know, within our streams, our creeks, our rivers. Our waterways are there. There's nowhere for our salmon to get home in a lot of places, and we're very fortunate on the Nisqually. Though I think about that all the time when I'm down there. Just how lucky we are. You know, my grandfather, he always talked about we lived in paradise on the Nisqually River, and I was just telling one of our council members about that last night, that we're going to get back to paradise. So you know, that's the goal, is to be able to live. You know, to be able to enjoy that river and not have to worry about what's coming down the river or coming in on the tide. So,
You know, I remember the day when we had a lot of adversity. We still do, but in terms of the amount of adversity, it has diminished extensively. And a really good reason for that is leaders like you, Mr. Chairman, and David, and others on this call. The Nisqually has been held up as an example, an exemplary watershed throughout this country and internationally. And a lot of it is because of the collaboration and, again, the leadership that you have provided. Are there any other questions?
hey, don't hype up David too much now, Steve. All right, like you got him going already tonight. Okay, I'm just teasing, Dave.
I know.
Last week received
I had a question.
recognition. We
Yes,
just
sir.
received the national recognition from the EPA on our partnership building. So it is out there. The secret's out there about what we do in this quality. I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question has to do with sort of one of the major sources of greenhouse gases, which we know greenhouse gases are the things that are causing climate change. And in Thurston County, the second most important source of greenhouse gases is transportation. The first being energy produced in buildings. So thinking about that a little bit, and one of the other things that we know is that when you build more lanes on a highway, you invite more cars, right? And so I was just wondering if there's been any discussion in the, thinking about how this new bridge would be designed and built to find ways to limit, encourage people not to drive, limit the vehicle miles traveled going across that bridge. Or at least if they have to drive, encourage people to drive cars and vehicles that don't emit greenhouse gases, such as electric vehicles and so forth. So I just wanted to ask that question, and I'm sure that's probably been part of the discussion, but just kind of curious about that.
It definitely is part of our discussion, and as we talk to our partners, we're always thinking about ways to limit and minimize those greenhouse carbon impacts. Hopefully one day there'll be electric cars that are universally driving across the Nisqually. But the real issue that we've discovered with cars that we're just beginning to work on, and the Nisqually Tribe is taking a leadership role on this one as well, is the tire dust phenomenon. There's a chemical used in the production of tires that's been identified by WSU and UW as being toxic to coho salmon, juveniles and adults at low levels of concentration and exposure. And it's called 6-PPD. And when it meshes with the environment, it creates a chemical called 6-PPD quinone. And when it washes off the tires into the roadway, into the roads, and then into the streams, it's killing our fish. And so we're working hard now and taking a leadership role, Willie and I, to try to advocate for two basic things. One is source removal, trying to get it out of the production of tires, and also treatment, because we're going to be dealing with the legacy of these tires for 20 or 30 years before it's completely removed. And so better stormwater treatment, which we hope to use our I-5 project as a model to treat stormwater, not only for 6 ppd quinone, but everything else that's coming out of cars, from copper and whatever else is coming in fluids and those kind of things as well, and have that serve as a model for how it can be done throughout the state of Washington. It's going to be a challenge. This 6 ppd, if you haven't Googled it, Google it. It's a really interesting work that's been done by WSU and the UW. And it is, in my opinion, this is the DDT of our generation. DDT found in the 50s to kill raptors. And it took a long time to get it out of our systems because industry fought every step of the way. Read Rachel Carson's book. This is our DDT. And we know now it's killing fish today. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I had a call from a tribal elder out at Puyallup who wanted to talk about this issue. And when I talked to him about it, he broke down in tears because he said, David, I'm a tribal fisherman. Tomorrow, I'm going to get in my car with my boat trailer tires, and I'm going to drive up to my fish landing, and I'm going to go exercise my treaty right. And now I know when I do that, I'm contributing to the death of my fish. We have to solve that problem. That's a big problem. And so we're taking on the industry. We're taking on the chemical industry. This is going to be a big fight. You're going to hear a lot more about this as we move through it, but that's a really big, big deal for us right now.
I saw a question come up regarding light rail and the possibility of extending it down here.
So Willie is there. I mean, from an economic standpoint, I think the tribe certainly supports bringing light rail down to Thurston County. And we're very interested as we rebuild I-5 to make it available for that use.
That'd be amazing to think about. You know, I was thinking about that. We had some friends go to the Seahawks game from down here. What was it, the day after New Year's? I think on the 2nd. They were, you know, it's kind of icy out still. It was a little ugly, and a light rail would have been great to take. You know, they looked at the train, you know, over on Yelm Highway there. That wasn't an option, but you know, light rail would be amazing. Take out so many cars, take out so much traffic, and just stress on the environment, but more importantly, on the mental health of everybody. I think that would definitely help. So
yeah, that'll definitely be in the planning consideration. Good question.
Any other questions, folks?
Yeah, I have a question.
I got it. Go ahead.
This is Jason Selwitz. Good evening. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you could talk about what the Nisqually are doing to work with the Skokomish and Squaxin Island, Chehalis, and other tribes in the area to address salmon recovery, climate change, and other related issues.
I can start off there, Dave. You know, I think you're seeing a change in the leadership within our tribes, within the state, federal, city, and you know, I feel like my generation and our generation is a little bit more open to having these conversations that might have been tough 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even, you know, 5, 6 years ago, maybe, you know. But I think now, you know, for me as the chairman, you know, I'm actually meeting with some folks from Squaxin on Friday, which, you know, it's really about building those relationships with our own family first. You know, I have family who are Squaxin, a lot of our Nisqually people do. You know, we have a lot of different, you know, family all over the place. And, you know, I think we realize here in the South Sound, the process that we go through, how tough it is. But, you know, really, it's not even about that. It's about all of us here trying to protect what we have. And, you know, I always think that, you know, it's tough to explain to our elders the lack of fish that we are able to harvest and how many days we're on the water now. And, you know, my father, he had a tough time getting that across to the fishermen. They, you know, because they fish, they're so a certain way, you know, these elders in their 70s and their 80s, you know, that's the way they've lived their whole lives, you know. But now I think it's time for us to realize as our tribal fishermen that it's about our sustainability, our culture, you know, really having it be there for the next generation so we can teach my kid and my family, you know, how to hang a net and set a net.
Yeah, so to add on that, we support each other as much as possible in salmon recovery through a lot of different ways. One, through the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, which we're all members, through the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council, which I'm the chair, and Skokomish and all the other tribes are members of. And so we're in this together. As Willie pointed out, we're in the, I called you Billy, because you're sounding like your dad.
Well, I think by saying that, you know, you reminded me of Dave Herrera, you know, and some of the big issues going down, you know, in Olympia. You know, maybe you could talk about the work with maybe the Lorraine Loomis Act, you know, really to honor Lorraine, our leader who left us a little bit too early this past year, who was the former chairwoman of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission. You know, it's tough to see her to leave us so soon and sudden, but you know, I feel like it's our time to step up and really, you know, take it to the next level where our ancestors and elders weren't able to take it to. I think we're ready to do that. Bob's a prime example, being on the commission. I know that my father is very happy looking down to see a Nisqually tribal member, all the work that he did, being arrested right where Bob's meets at, right there, you know, right there on the bridge right there, you know. So really, I think about just the passion and every, you know, seeing Bob, it's really amazing to see that for our young people. And I'm going to keep talking about that, Bob. I'm sorry, but you know, it means a lot though, just in the whole big picture.
That's okay, Willie. You go ahead and keep talking about it. That's fine. I appreciate it.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, this is Barack. I thank you all for this really wonderful, informative discussion. It's really great. I want to tag on to comments made a little bit ago about confronting chemical industry. Sometimes it's confounding issues. I recently read an article in the New York Times titled, "As Miners Chase Clean Energy Minerals, Tribes Fear a Repeat of the Past." And it basically describes a double-edged sword of providing critical minerals for batteries in a renewable energy future, and at the same time jeopardizing the health of huge swaths of fish-bearing streams. So I'm wondering if Nisqually is dealing with any issues like that, and how, if they're connecting with other tribes on these issues.
Rocket, it's such a great question. And I guess we're fortunate that we don't have lithium deposits in the Nisqually watershed, so there isn't a big rush for lithium. But the same kind of mentality applies to hydroelectric power. And for those of you who are tracking what's going on in the Skagit with a series of pieces that King 5 did about the Skagit relicensing, we tend to think of hydropower as being green and renewable and safe. And it may be those things if managed and operated properly. But if you just scratch a little bit below the surface, and in Nisqually, we know all about this. Hydropower can have tremendous detrimental effects on the environment and on the people that live in the watershed. You know, for years we had a diversion dam at River Mile 26 with still 20 miles of habitat above it, and there was no fish ladder, and whatever fish were able to jump over the dam and spawn, there was no fish screen, so all the fish went through the turbines. And this went on for 50 years by the city of Centralia. And so everything has a cost to it. That's a really good point, Barack. Even the notion of electric vehicles not emitting carbon. Well, they're not emitting carbon, but if you dig a little bit deeper, there are other issues with those things as well. So we have to be really aware of the intended and unintended consequences of choices. And it's a brilliant point. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, this has been an excellent program. and you've done an extraordinary job. I'm very happy that we had a very large crowd, and I think that really the onus is upon us all to go forward and support the good legislation in the legislature, to support on a national scale as well, those pieces of legislation and those leaders who are working with us, and to get personally involved to the fullest degree possible in preserving our salmon, answering the challenge of climate change, and moving forward in a very positive way. Tribal culture and heritage is an extremely good example of the kinds of pathways that we can take to achieve those things. You know, I was just one final comment from me. I was working with Ed Johnstone this last several days on his column that he will be doing now as the new chairman of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. And really the theme was, the money is good. Thank you, keep it coming. But most importantly of all, we need to have the will to preserve our environment and to bring back salmon and to restore the watersheds, the will, and that's going to take education. It's going to take everybody educating. And so thank you for being on board. And unless there's any additional questions, that's our program.
One last thing for me, Steve, we would love to come back and provide updates when updates are available. And we want to stay connected to you all because we're going to need the community to push on I-5 and our community forest and the other things we're working on. So we want to stay connected to all of you, and we'll do it through my friend Steve, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. And David, Willie, and Steve, thank you so much. This has been an awesome program. I do want to ask a question on closing, and that is, as a community, I know that you said the legislature and giving our feedback to them. And so as a community, I think we're going to look for what is the best way we can help. So that's really what we all need to know.
And we will help you think through that. And there may be multiple ways to help. So we'll think about that too.
Yeah, on that note, you mentioned earlier that you hope to have your studies completed in November. Did you mean of this year, of 22 or of 23?
My hope is to have them done in, I keep forgetting what year we're in, of this year, 2022.
Okay.
That's a bit aggressive and way more aggressive than the Department of Transportation usually operates, but I like to push, and so we're going to keep pushing.
Keep
Well,
pushing, David.
that would be something to look for, is, you know, getting information about the results, because then we can directly help support legislation that would come from that.
Yeah, and there'll be opportunities for public engagement through the process, and we'll make sure you all are notified about those opportunities too.
I'd like to point out something too, Pat Perry. I've been really impressed by the coverage on the Olympian of all of these issues. Most of the things we talked about tonight, I was familiar with because they have written articles in all of them. And, you know, I don't know what's going on, but the Daily O has been doing a good job as far as the tribes are concerned.
We had a very inquisitive reporter at the TNT in Tacoma who was really interested in this project and took it on and did a great job on this work. And I think her articles appeared in the Olympian as well. So kudos to her.
Yeah.
Support local news.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, we look forward to having you guys again. Thank you again, Steve, Willie, and David. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.